Welcome to the Kind Heartfulness podcast, exploring the inner reaches of the heart and mind, brought to you by Germany-Austria, Germany-Austria, and your host, Eric Solomon.
Welcome to the Kind Heartfulness podcast, and in today's episode, we're going to explore Tukdam with Dr. Tawni Tidwell. And what is Tukdam? Tukdam is a meditative state that's said to occur after clinical death, in which the body shows minimal signs of decomposition or odor and retaining a lifelike appearance for days or even weeks. Practitioners of Tukdam are said to be merging their consciousness with the innate clear light nature of mind. So it's really a privilege to be able to discuss Tukdam, the subject of Tukdam, with an expert in the field, Dr. Tawni Tidwell. She's a biological anthropologist and a Tibetan medical doctor, and she's currently research assistant professor at the Center for Healthy Minds of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And Tawni's research facilitates bridges across the Western scientific tradition and Tibetan medical tradition. She's also keeps a clinical practice both in Madison, Wisconsin and Vienna, Austria, and you can learn more about her work if you follow the links in the description we posted online. So please join me in welcoming her to the podcast. Dr. Tawni Tidwell, welcome to the Kind Heartfulness podcast.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, I'm really happy you're here because we're going to talk about a subject I didn't think I would get to talk about on this podcast, Tukdam. So you've been doing research on Tukdam, and I thought maybe we could start by explaining for our audience what Tukdam is.
Yeah, fantastic. It's complicated as a topic, and as you and I have spoke about before, it's quite different across different schools, different teachers. So I think it's helpful to first just introduce the term. So Tukdam, we can think about a sacred vow being damsik. So dam, that same root. So that's samaya. That's with a teacher, that's with a practice, right? Or damja as in a commitment. And so that can be to also a specific set of commitments of a certain practice or of a certain view. One's deity or one's chosen deity or yidam, so that's that dam as well. Practicing any of those, right? And then the one that we're really looking at more specifically in the study, and that's a particular meditative state that can accomplish the central goals of tantric practice. And so that's what we're looking at in the Tukdam study. And so what we're really looking at is different ways in which the practitioner will actually reach opportunity to realize or become aware of the subtlest state of mind that occurs at death. And this is a real important moment because this is this quintessential time when the subtlest state of mind can start to disassociate from the coarse body. And this is something that can be basically practiced or rehearsed through practice throughout one's life, throughout different practices. But naturally, this time occurs in our lifetime for everybody to recognize this fundamental nature of mind, right? This usel or clear light mind. And so to be able to recognize the begging usel, right? So this kind of exemplar clear light mind in practice allows one then to be able to have the opportunity at the time of death to be able to recognize that in the meditative state as well. And so this is a time when the body is not obscuring that opportunity to see the clear light mind. The gross sensory impressions of our body have dissipated. Conceptual elaboration, a lot of that gross cognitive function has really dissipated. And so this is through different practice states that use tantric physiology to do that. And we can talk about that a little bit later too, but just thinking about that through the various tantric practices or the various nature of mind practices, right? That allows for a simulated clear light mind to be recognized, so that at the time of death, one can actually recognize that usel, that clear light mind, as the subtle mind disassociates from the coarse body.
So what does that look like?
Yeah, so that looks different across different practitioners. And so traditionally, it has been observed that a practitioner going into a dying state would sit into meditative posture, full Vajrasana if possible, or would be kind of in a half lotus, would go ahead and go into their main practice, right? And so for the Geluks, this could be Guhya Samaja, Chakra Samvara, Vajrabhairava, various highest yoga tantric deities have been used to then allow for the dissipation in the completion stage into emptiness and then to reside in that clear light mind. Right? And so for that time period, we see no decomposition, so an attenuated decomposition of the body, a radiance to the face, that all gross functions of breath have ceased, so heart and lung function have ceased, but the skin is still supple and pliable, that many people who are in that presence will describe a floral odor, a very pleasant odor, or at least no odor. And then that individual can reside there for several days to a week to several weeks. And then as they release that state, then the body will go into decomposition. So it'll start exhibiting signs of skin slippage, of literally having the body go into a bloating phase, into putrid odor, and then a rapid acceleration of the decomposition. And then the putrid odor can be very, very overwhelming within hours of the state being released.
So what you're saying is then that for people who see a practitioner in Tukdam, most likely, even though they would be clinically pronounced dead, they're sitting in meditative posture. Their skin tone looks very lifelike. You don't see any of the obvious signs of death in being reflected in their skin tone. And also there are no bad odors of, like, just to put it crudely, a body rotting. Instead, even sometimes there's a kind of a sweet smell in the air. These are some of the classic signs. So basically what we're talking about is people who are dying in the highest form of meditation practice, according here you've described the Galupa tradition, but I think in the Nyingma Kagyu, it's a slightly different way of expressing it. But the point is the same, is that they're dying while recognizing you can say the ultimate result of the practice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so you've been actually studying practitioners who are going into this state. It's kind of described as neither dead nor alive.
Right, yes.
Right. Wow.
Suspension and animation. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about this project? It's been going for quite a while, as I recall.
Yeah, absolutely. So this really came out of a conversation with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Dr. Richie Davidson, effective neuroscientist, who's the founder and director of the Center for Healthy Minds, where I'm a researcher. And Richie, it was a Mind and Life Dialogues in 1995. And so His Holiness was describing the Tukdam of his tutor. And this is Khepje Ling Rinpoche. And Khepje Ling Rinpoche went into 13-day Tukdam in 1983. And he was just saying this phenomena would be a remarkable opportunity for scientists to investigate the nature of consciousness. And you, Richie, I would love for you to take the best of science to understand this, and invited him and his team. At that time, it was the Weizmann Brain Center at University of Wisconsin-Madison, to bring equipment and to study it. And so it took some time to collect the amount of funds to buy $200,000 kits of EEG, EK, so looking at neurophysiology of the brain, right? So how do we measure the neurophysiology, brain activity, peripheral biology? So is there any activity, biological activity in the body, any activity in the heart? So EKG, looking at oxygen in the blood, looking at is there any carbon dioxide being coming out of the nostrils for these practitioners, or oxygen being uptook? So all of these physiological measures were part of this kit that we were able to assemble. And so there was, by 2006, enough of the funds were generated to buy and purchase these kits and install one in North India, in Dharamsala, at Mensikang, the Tibet Medical Institute of His Holiness in North India, and then in Mungod. And so that was at Drepung Losaling. And included with that was also thermal imaging. And this was a kit that was also procured with permission from the National Security Agency. So it was a very, very high-tech form to just try and look at how much heat the body was emitting. Yeah. And so that was
This is because, well, for two reasons. One, that the body seems still to be, the skin seems to be supple and all this, but also because usually you hear that as the mind retracts into the subtle mind, then there's still warmth in the heart center. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So from the tantric physiological perspective, you have the winds in the right and left channels be pulled into the central channel, the upper and lower coming down into the heart, indestructible drop of the heart. And so the heart has been a really important area of investigation for the project, because of how our Tibetan Buddhist community sees a critical sign, right, of Tukdam. And so that is a residual heat at the heart. And this has been described for hundreds of years, that's a very trustworthy sign of the Tukdam state. That's pretty much recognized across traditions and schools that I've been able to assess. And so we partnered with Delek Hospital. So this is the conventional medical facility in Dharamsala. So this is Dr. Dorji Seiten Sarutsang, who is the chief medical officer there, and he's the personal physician of His Holiness, with Amchi Tamdin, who's the Tibet medical personal physician of His Holiness at Mensikang, and then the Mensikang team. And this is because there are branch clinics all over India and all the settlements, and that these are physicians who could come to the body and be able to provide assessments. And so that's initially how it started out. And so Tenzin Namdul was the clinical research director at Mensikang at the time, so he was, quote, on body a lot of the time, right, going to these sites, along with one of the physicians at Delek Hospital. And then we had various neuroscientists and EEG specialists from our center here in Madison that would fly over to India to try and assess these states, right? And so it's like whenever someone goes into a state, they call the team and we have to like race to the case. Right. And so, yeah, so as you can imagine, a lot of these states aren't actually declared until 3 days in. And this comes from the cultural perspective. I mean, Desi Sangye Gyatso talks about it in the Bekar, that one should leave the body for 3 to 3.5 days, anyone, whether they're a practitioner or not to disturb the consciousness. And so if it kind of persists beyond that, then people, and it has these signs, and people say, oh, it's a Tukdam. And so this is why the study really had trouble to get there earlier than 3 days. And so that's how the early part of the study was initiated, was just coming to any case that was announced, assessing it for the neurophysiology and a lot of these biomarkers, and then gathering data. So we had the first pilot studies after kind of these trials, right? 2006, 2007, starting in 2013. And from 2013 to 2019, we had 23 cases. And within those 23 cases, we found no brain activity, no heat at the heart, basically nothing that was significant scientifically that this is an extraordinary state. And so we went ahead and published in 2021 a null finding paper that said, lo and behold, there's no brain activity. And that's because the center is also very committed to publishing null findings, to say, even when we don't find anything, it's important to acknowledge that. And however, since that time, we were recognizing that actually what is extraordinary is from the forensics perspective, that actually from a forensics perspective, that the body usually goes through several stages into which it starts to bloat by 48 hours to 72 hours. So initially you have the paling of the body, you have blood start pooling. This is called livor mortis. You start the rigidity of the body as the muscles start to contract and harden, right? And so you actually have that come through at 24 hours and then pass by 48 hours. And then putrefaction starts after that. And so what we were seeing is none of this. We saw no blood pooling. We saw no decomposition start to set in. Skin slippage usually starts, within that first 24 to 36 hours. And so we thought, well, we can actually document that part. And so that's why.
Let me just ask you a quick question, because I'm thinking I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, well, I mean, are there cases where that happens anyway? I mean, it's not like everybody goes exactly at 24 hours. This happens at 36 hours. I mean, how does that compare to other sort of generally observed medical events?
Absolutely. So great. Yes. So that's exactly what our forensics community said. Well, actually, there's a lot of variation that it depends on the climate.
Nobody's average, right?
Right.
Average, but nobody is in fact average.
Yeah. And this is where, as we started collecting data and we started writing them up as cases, right, for publications, this is what reviewers said, is that you have no controls. What is the chronomorphology? What does that look like in that specific place with that specific community, right? And we don't have that data. Yeah. In fact, it's extremely hard to get. So what we could show is that several sites in the US and Canada are creating these body farms. So bodies that have been donated to science are put in indoor and outdoor locations and then tracked over time. And it creates this actually really remarkably robust set of data to say, in general, under these specific climatic conditions, this is what we expect to see. So based on a lot of that data, we were able to show that this is way outside of the bell curve, that we could see a week, maybe in certain dry conditions and arid conditions, but this is humid, tropical,
it's India.
It's India. And I think the other startling thing for our forensic experts was that there's no insect activity. And if anyone has come to India, you know, flies are all over you all the time, right? So, so there was no deposition of eggs or any maggots or anything in any of these cases, not even insects around the body. So that was actually quite surprising to our forensic experts who had not seen this state at all before. I mean, they were quite startled to even learn about that. And then image after image, they're like, why is there not insect activity? There should at least be something. So I think that was because usually you have that starting in the first 24 hours, right? And these are, and I mean, this is inside areas where it's not a sealed building, right? The windows are open.
A modern office building, which is fully climate controlled and hermetically sealed.
Totally, yeah. Dogs are often wandering through different areas, right? So, and the doors themselves have these wide gaps underneath them, usually. So this was something that we were able to at least show that in our publication that we don't have control data, but we were presenting the 2 longest cases that the study had tracked, which was 38 days and 27 days, to just say, hey, this is interesting. As a forensic community, we should be looking at more and more cases to try and track, is this way outside the bell curve or not? And to encourage the forensic community to start to collect more data in different parts of the world among different practitioners. And this is also interesting for me because I didn't know that forensics really didn't look at what does one's activities and behaviors in one's life impact dying and what we see in the dying state and the postmortem state. They really developed their discipline out of criminology, looking at how do you prove time since death for the courts, right? And so they weren't interested in, say, Catholic saints and kind of immaculate states that, right? or that, I mean, honestly, the other thing that was surprising to me is what people have imbibed, like cocaine or crazy antibiotic courses, or, and how that changes the rate of decomposition. There's really relatively little data on that. And so we're starting to get that data coming in, but that was really important for us, is to show that these individuals actually didn't have various medications that would kind of preserve the body over time, or speed up decomposition, like cocaine and various drugs will speed up decomposition over time. Yeah.
One of the many downsides to taking cocaine is it's the decomposition of your body. I'm guessing that's probably, of all the things to worry about, one of the more minor side effects, but it is something to keep in mind.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Why don't you tell us a little bit about then one of the long cases that you know about, and what was most remarkable about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So after
just saying 27 days, it's already kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah. So after the 2019 mark, we entered a COVID period. And this was also synergistic with His Holiness requesting our team in the US and in India to join forces in collaboration with the Russian Academy of Sciences. And this is Professor Sviatoslav Medvedev and his team with Tela Rinpoche, they were interested in also studying Tukdam. And so they were in parallel looking at some cases for a year while we were also in the field, our team. And they had recruited
Americans and Russians cooperating, and maybe it's a model for how we can find a way out of the current mess that the world.
Yes. And at that time, I think that a lot of our Tibetan colleagues and collaborators were saying, like, maybe this would be a nice like a Cold War competition. We'll have some real results coming from Tukdam.
I see. Right. There could be that.
But excited about the competitive aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we'd never met them. So they had recruited monastics who had gone through the Emory Tibet Science Initiative, who had studied a lot of science. So Geshe Lodro Sangpo, Geshe Ngama Norbu, others who were part of this initial Tenzin Gyatso scholarship recipients who then became leaders in the monasteries in terms of setting up science centers, become the science instructors, and also helping and working with other research collaborations. So they brought them to Russia, a whole batch of them, to train in fMRI, MRI, and EEG, so that they could then work a lot of the Russian equipment in Russian. And by that time, our equipment was not working. I mean, it had been in the field for quite some time. It had gone through several repairs, several replacements, but COVID, right? And so they had their equipment already installed. And so we all met on Zoom for the first time. And I think we didn't really know what to do with each other. There were different ways of working. There were different assumptions about how to control for different variables, how to go about what was important to what data was important or not. So these were all things that had to be kind of ironed out. But there was a commitment to seeing this through, especially this was His Holiness's wish. And so lo and behold, we had a case right in the midst of COVID happen at Gyutu Monastery up in Sidbury near Dharamsala. And everything was on lockdown. None of our team could move anywhere. And this was Geshe Genin Sirinla. So this is a very public case. So his name can be mentioned. And he had contracted COVID and had gone to the hospital, but had refused treatment. And they brought him back to the monastery, and he was allowed one attendant, and that's it. And he was moved to another room that was isolated. We spoke with his attendant in the monastery, and they were very much open to having data collected, because we said it would just be images, basically, and temperature of the body. And so our team, this was Tenzin Desel, who is the coordinator at Mensikang, instructing him daily, morning and evening, of how to collect the data. And so this was our 38-day case.
Wow.
Yeah. So
38 days, meaning 38 days with all the signs of Tukdam, including the absence of a foul odor and the skin being very supple and no signs of decomposition.
Correct. So morning and night, we had the images sent to Dr. Leslie Eisenberg and Dr. Alexander Fedotev, the forensic expert on the US and the Russian side, and they reviewed them daily, and they would assess what was expected, knowing the time since death. So we started collecting 7 days in, and they were both quite startled to note that there was no sign of decomposition as we were tracking temperature and pressure, right? So this was in the upper 70s. This area is quite humid. It's kind of a subtropical region. And it's also
Upper
an area.
70s, just because a lot of our audience is European, is like, you can say 23, 24 degrees.
Correct.
Yeah.
Degrees Celsius. Yes.
Celsius, yeah.
Yep. And again, no insect activity. He was reclining, so he was laying down on the bed. It wasn't a meditative posture, but there was no bloating. There was no discoloration on his body. We had the attendant actually do just a light pinch of the skin, so there was no skin slippage, which was quite startling to our forensic experts. You didn't see the veins start to become apparent on his abdomen. The blood pooling on the undersurfaces, we had them taking pictures underneath. There was no any kind of fluids that were being emitted from his reproductive organs or otherwise. So it was, and that there was also not a strong fragrant odor, but the attendant would describe that the odor was quite pleasant. And we actually requested that if it was possible for several others to come in when they kind of lifted the restrictions. And they had several other monastics come in and just confirm that they smelled not a putrid odor and what they described as a fragrant odor. And this was important because you can get habituated, right, when you're in a room with somebody to the odor. So to have some fresh observations. And so then around the 37th day, this is when His Holiness was reciting the root tantra of the Goya Samaja to request him to release the state. And this is because of this understanding that you can go too long in Tukdam, you can kind of bliss out. Yes. And that can have implications for the next reincarnation, right? Perhaps duller faculties in the next reincarnation and so forth. And so it took a few tries, but he did release it. And then we noticed this rapid change and decomposition started setting in, skin slippage, a putrid odor was quite overwhelming to the attendants, they said. And we were able to document all of that. So that's the first case that we have published. Yeah.
Wow. And so people can find that online. And
yeah. So the forensic data is published in Forensic Science International reports. And then the ethnographic data is in cultural medicine and psychiatry.
where do we go next? What do you see as would be the next hurdle or challenge, scientific challenge to overcome? Oh, and one thing that's interesting here is that the on-the-ground scientists are all monks who've been trained. They're not Russians or Americans. They're actual Tibetans who've been, is that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So our team is now about 65 team members. So that includes everyone, Russian, those of us in the US, and then those on the ground. And His Holiness's personal physicians. But the bulk of that is the field team, and it's about 4 to 6 monastics in all these monasteries, Gelug monasteries in the south and the north as well. And so most of them have gone through the Emory Tibet Science Initiative training, but otherwise they've been trained in the project, and several have also gone to Russia with Professor Medvedev. And so I mean, they're remarkable. Most of them are completing their Geshe Larampa degrees. They're trying to weigh very intense studies amidst also being called away for Tukdam cases. They're so dedicated to the project. And also they're very interested and curious in the science itself. They are complete contributors to us collaboratively thinking through, like, what can we measure? What can we look at? So it's been an amazing process to just co-create this project, understanding that there's these two very different traditions of how we see the body, how we even define life and death, not to mention the mind, right? And often they'll say, well, how can we kind of like confirm consciousness or prove the mind, right? And this is like a lot of the younger team members. And so it's been fun to also see the older team members who've kind of been around for quite a while and been looking at this, talk about, like, this is really about different ways of valid evidence of seeing what confirms that different traditions, assumptions about mind or body. And so here we have in the Western tradition, not even a clear understanding of mind, let alone consciousness. Right? So we're not going to actually prove mind or consciousness or Tukdam. But what we're trying to do is to say this is an extraordinary state. So I think this is what the team has moved towards, is saying, what could we contribute to different scientific disciplines? And our next interest is looking at the microbiome. And this is because the body farms have found that the microbiotic signature of death is the most nuanced in terms of being able to determine time since death, what's happened to the body. And so, of course, we can't get the gut microbiome, but we can at least take a oral microbiome sample. So it's just taking a little swab in the mouth.
Yeah.
So in December, we made a trip to South India, to Mungod and Bilakupi, and met with the Gananti Rinpoche, with all of the abbots of all the monasteries, and just presented the results of the research so far and requested them to provide guidance, and asked if we had their permission to move forward with these new measures. And that was the oral microbiome, so collecting a little saliva or just doing a swab within the inner cheek of the practitioner, and then on the skin, just like a cotton swab. So not taking any skin, just like a light brush. And then the odor, so the volatile organic compounds. So just having various ways of collecting static or dynamic sampling around the body of the odors, and then taking those and analyzing them. And interestingly, but everyone supported it, and His Holiness had already supported this as well. But there was a concern that we'd had the team members would have to be very, very careful in how they actually accessed the salival area or the inner cheek area, just because it might disturb the state of Tukdam. And so this is something the team has been really careful about historically, but that each attendant, each family is different in what they feel is okay or not, and that might actually disturb the state.
Sure. So I know you haven't published, is that right? You haven't published, but is there anything that you've found that you feel you can tell us about?
Sure. You mean in terms of the forensics?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the main finding of the case report that we submitted is that there's attenuated decomposition until the state is released. So this was a 37-day attenuated decomposition, with on the 38th day decomposition starting to set in, and then a rapid acceleration of the decomposition. So that's been the main finding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I meant that's good. Thank you.
Oh,
I was actually asking about that was very important, in fact. Thank you. But I was actually asking about the microbiome. Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we haven't done any sampling yet. We're just getting together the
So
funding for it.
this is to be done.
Yes, but the hypothesis is, and this is what's been already shown in the body farm oral microbiome studies, is that there's specific phases of transitions of the different microbiotic communities in the oral cavity that mark these stages of the postmortem state. And so our theory, our hypothesis, is that the first stage will be extremely elongated, so that we won't see the microbiome of the oral cavity transitioning to, say, the environmental microbiotic communities until quite late. And so if we can show that it's actually an attenuated transition, that also shows that something's happening in the body to maintain the microbial activity in a way that doesn't signal to them, the body is actually dying and we need to, or we have the opportunity to digest or ingest the tissues, the fluids, all the amazing carbohydrates the body provides microbial communities during the postmortem state, right? So.
Right. Okay, so that we'll have to come back to you in a year or two and ask you back on to give us the latest on that subject.
Absolutely. And for the odor too, what we expect to find, and this has been really cool to work with some other teams around the world that are just interested in the odor of death, right? And so there's a team at the Czech Academy of Sciences that is looking at the postmortem period as well, and looking at biblical understandings of, say, animal sacrifice, to understanding what was the cultural experiences of odor and kind of dying states. And they've brought in perfumists to characterize these different chemical aromatic compounds. They brought in a biochemist from Russia to look at it. So they have a whole database of what would become a floral odor versus a putrid odor. And then we have Dr. Clément Martin. He's in Belgium. He is also a biochemist that trains cadaver dogs and cadaver rats to find human remains in natural disasters and various contexts. And so he has a fantastic sampling method and also a library himself. So we'd be able to then compare what does these kind of early odors that people describe as fragrant look like on the chemical spectrum compared to those that are more putrid. So.
Wow. Okay. I've been just saying, wow, wow, wow. This is a fascinating topic, and also interesting is the puzzle of finding what you can measure, and then I guess what it might mean. So it's for me at least interesting on a number of different levels. I'm curious, has this had an effect on you, the way you think about the subject, your practice, and I hope you don't mind me saying to everyone here, you've been practicing Tibetan Buddhist meditation for some time now, and so you're also a student of the Dharma.
Yeah, it's a complicated. I think for me, I'm so curious about His Holiness's interest in the scientific study of Tukdam, because he wants us to understand consciousness. That's his main directive.
Yes.
And I feel like we're so far from even gathering anything that could be helpful for understanding consciousness. And he talks about this as a, many, many generations horizon that we will be. He's even asked us, could you look at the 80 conceptions of mind from a scientific perspective? And we're like, wow, Your Holiness, I think we're maybe 7-8 generations in away from even thinking about equipment that might be helpful for that kind of thing. But for me, I think the most inspiring part is seeing these remarkable practitioners. I mean, these are individuals. Many of them are these old practitioners that went into retreat after retreat after retreat in Tibet, that came out into India and are these remarkable inspirations of what is a life dedicated to practice. And I think the outcome that I've experienced and I've seen is this, just this remarkable impulse of just how critical it is for us to dedicate our lives to practice. I mean, what you experience, what you observe is really miraculous in my view. Like there's really what we study and what we take data on is just a tiny minutia of what you actually experience in the presence of a Tukdam, and what people experience in the vicinity, right? And what people observe. And I think that itself is speaks to just how limited we are in this kind of conventional view of life, of living, of observing. And I think seeing the younger monastics who, they're in Gaelic institutions where the focus is really study.
Yeah.
16, 17, 18 years of study, and then focus on practice, right? And these young monastics who are part of this project, especially with Geshe Norbu in their science class, are starting to get up at 4 a.m. to practice before they begin their normal, monastic studies. And to see them also question kind of where our world has gone, how we're so distracted with our iPhones and with social media and with all the amazing, crazy things we have in this life, and how to redirect our attention and how to create a context where we can really focus and cultivate practice, and how we can really support one another as a community, as a global community, and the precious opportunity we have to practice the Dharma in a time that is degenerating, right? That we have really a critical window to do that in before things get even much harder.
Yeah. I think in one sense, maybe though this has always been the challenge, is that we have a limited time. There's some things about the modern world that actually are very supportive of practice. Like in general, we can expect to live 2 lifetimes compared to not that long ago. That helps. Of course, then when you factor in Netflix and social media, that probably wipes out the advantage and makes it really similar. But I think this thing of feeling some urgency around practice, it's probably a net plus. And I do think that if you really don't completely succumb to distraction, but avail yourself of modern medicine and nutrition and hygiene, that probably then you have a much better shot at getting somewhere with practice, because you have so many more years to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I think it also, many people who are not Buddhists who see, say, the Tukdam documentary produced by Donna Coleman, Between Worlds, or who witness images of Tukdam and learn the stories of these practitioners, I think it does inspire an inquiry into how they're using their life, right? Yeah. And what are they doing? And what does that mean? And not that they become Buddhists, but there's a really beautiful dynamic I've noticed with those who encounter Tukdam. And it's incredibly inspiring. And I think it allows for those conversations to be...
I think that just meeting those masters that came to spiritual maturity before the Cultural Revolution, where they had literally, so many of them spent decades in retreat, it's just palpably obvious they're just not like the rest of us. And I mean, for me, and you can say my generation of practitioners, we didn't really study philosophy. We just met masters like Abjay Tukulorjin, Dino Khyentse Rinpoche, and Dudjom Rinpoche. That was like all the convincing you needed, because it's just by entering into the room with them, it was just so unlike anybody else you ever met.
Yeah.
And but now, and I don't know how to rate anyone's realization. I say no realization myself. I have no ability to rate anybody's realization, but I can say that although I suspect some of my teachers are pretty realized, because they're so touched by modernity, it's harder to see it in the way that you could when you met these, you could say, practitioners who are fresh off the boat, so to speak, fresh out of Tibet. It's just very different. They you could meet them in this world, but they were so obviously not of this world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I wonder, as they're almost all gone now. There's still a few left, like His Holiness, who, anyway, we'll see. Although he was actually quite young when he left Tibet.
Absolutely. And this longest case, I think that was one of the beautiful aspects of it. So he left with His Holiness to come into India. And I think so much of the characteristics of his Tukdam was kind of honoring that time, even of he entered right on March 10th, right? As the Tibetan Uprising Day, right? There's so much symbology around, and this comes back to like the Damtsik, right? The honoring one's teacher, right? And that karmic connection with one's teacher, that there's so much devotion about to His Holiness. And I think you can see that too in terms of the remarkable devotion. And I think that's something that devotion, I think, is hard in the modern world for many people. And to see so many of these practitioners just with utter devotion, dedication, that their whole life kind of breathes and speaks to the Dharma.
I have one thing to say about this devotion business, because it's not just Tibetan Buddhism. Because I give lots of seminars now. It's an odd situation I find myself in, but I'm doing it. I'm going with the flow and listening. I was asked by my teachers. But I suspect that if it was 150 years ago and Tibetan Buddhism was coming in contact with Europeans and Americans, devotion wouldn't seem so strange. Because I think of some of the professors who I knew when I was young, and when they would talk about their mentors, their intellectual academic mentors, they would get tears in their eyes. They would get very soft and talk with great reverence. It's somehow now everything's transactional in the modern world. Well, my professor's paid. That's their job. That's their job. I mean, of course, it's their job, right? I mean, good thing. That's how come you got to learn something. And it's even like, it'd be the old days, you would be an indentured servant to a blacksmith, right? And for 8 to 10 years, and yet they made you sleep with the horses and stuff. But because of that, you had a trade, and you could have a family and a house and so forth and so on. And when you talk about this person, you only think of, if it wasn't for them, I would be so poor, and you would feel this upwelling of gratitude. And so I think this devotion is just that. It's just simple, ordinary gratitude. Someone's given you a gift, something that's thoroughly informs every moment of your life and in a wonderful way. And so it's natural you feel this kind of gratitude. And now we have this word devotion, and it seems so weird because in this world where everything's transactional and they were paid to do it, so I don't have to feel anything other than, well, I paid my tuition, so of course they paid me. It's, of course, it all seems very strange. I think it's a very sad thing. One of the things we're losing as a human culture is this appreciation and this gratitude for we're the recipients of all the knowledge and the painstaking effort that's gone to acquire that knowledge, and then it's been poured into us, and we just think of it in very transactional terms.
Absolutely. We just had Tom Brown Jr. pass about a week ago, who was one of the greatest teachers of wilderness survival, animal tracking, and nature awareness, and really revolutionized that for North America, studied with the Lipan Apache elder. And to see the countless people's lives he's touched, all I can say is that that's devotion, is that people's lives have been transformed for their entire life thereafter, that just the encounter with that, you can see differently, you can experience life differently, you can be differently. And that, it's so palpable how this one individual has really impacted people's lives in that way. And it's pure gratitude. It's just a humbling amount of devotion. Yeah.
Well, I have gratitude that you came to join us today.
Thank you so much, Eric.
This is a really important conversation. I hope you come back. I actually like to talk to you about wellness. That's another area of expertise in the future. So please consider.
Absolutely.
And thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Eric. I'm so grateful to be here, and it's such a pleasure.
You're welcome. Very welcome.
Thanks for listening. If you have enjoyed today's podcast, we like to invite you to continue the journey into the heart of enlightened mind at gonde.eu.